Imagine surviving a nuclear explosion. Now imagine surviving two. On August 6, 1945, a man watched the sky tear open above Hiroshima. 3 days later, he stood beneath the same apocalyptic light in Nagasaki. This is not fiction. This is the story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the only person officially recognized by the Japanese government to have survived both atomic bombings. His tale is one of unimaginable suffering, impossible odds, and a testimony that would echo through history. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was 29 years old in the summer of 1945. He worked as a draftsman for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, designing oil tankers at the company's shipyard in Nagasaki. He was a quiet man, dedicated to his work and devoted to his young family. His wife, Hisako, waited for him at home with their infant son, Katsutoshi. Life was hard during wartime, but the Yamaguchis endured like millions of other Japanese families. In early August 1945, Yamaguchi was sent on a business trip to Hiroshima. He traveled there with two colleagues to complete a 3-month assignment at another Mitsubishi shipyard. The work was nearly finished. August 6th was supposed to be his last day. By evening, he planned to catch a train back to Nagasaki, back to his family, back to normalcy. He had no idea that normalcy was about to be incinerated. That morning dawned, clear and hot. Yamaguchi left his lodgings early, heading toward the shipyard for final preparations. He walked through streets filled with people beginning their day. Children played, shopkeepers opened their stores. The city hummed with ordinary life. At approximately 8:15, Yamaguchi realized he had forgotten his stamp seal, an essential item for official documents in Japan. He turned back to retrieve it. As he walked across an open area, he looked up. A B-29 bomber passed overhead. This was not unusual. American planes had been spotted over Japan throughout the war. But then Yamaguchi saw something that froze him in place. Two parachutes drifted down from the aircraft, carrying what appeared to be small objects. In that moment of confusion, the sky exploded into light. The flash came first, a brilliant, searing white light that seemed to erase the world. Yamaguchi later described it as if a giant magnesium flare had been ignited directly in front of his eyes. The light was so intense that he could see the bones in his hands through his flesh. He threw himself to the ground, covering his eyes. Then came the heat. A wave of thermal radiation washed over him at 4,000 degrees Celsius. His exposed skin burned instantly. The left side of his face, his arms, his legs, all seared by invisible fire. The blast wave followed seconds later. It picked Yamaguchi up like a leaf in a hurricane and hurled him through the air. He crashed into a potato patch several meters away, unconscious. When he came to, the world had changed. The sky had turned black. A strange darkness covered everything, punctuated by fires that burned in every direction. Yamaguchi stood up, disoriented and in agony. His skin hung from his arms in sheets. His face felt like it was melting. He could barely see through his swollen, damaged eyes. He stumbled forward, calling out for his colleagues. Around him, Hiroshima was dying. The atomic bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, had detonated 1,800 feet above the city with the force of 15,000 tons of TNT. Within seconds, the temperature at ground zero reached 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Buildings vaporized. People were reduced to shadows, burned into concrete. A radius of total destruction extended for 1 mile in every direction. Yamaguchi found his two colleagues alive, but injured. Together, the three men began searching for shelter. They walked through scenes of horror that would haunt them forever. People with their skin hanging off, crying for water. Corpses piled in the streets. Fires consuming everything that had not been flattened by the blast. The city had become hell on earth. Somehow, through the chaos and destruction, Yamaguchi and his colleagues made their way to a functioning train station. They learned that trains were still running, that escape was possible. The journey from Hiroshima to Nagasaki took all night. Yamaguchi sat in the train car, his burned skin wrapped in whatever cloth they could find. Every movement brought fresh waves of pain. He could barely process what had happened. One bomb, a single weapon, had destroyed an entire city. It seemed impossible, beyond comprehension. Around him, other survivors sat in shocked silence. Some wept, others stared at nothing, their minds shattered by what they had witnessed. The train rolled through the darkness, carrying its cargo of broken humanity. Yamaguchi thought of his wife and son. He needed to reach them, to hold them, to confirm that somewhere in the world, life still existed as it had before. The burns on his body throbbed with each heartbeat. His ears rang from the blast, but he was alive. Against all probability, he had survived what many were already calling an atomic bomb. On the morning of August 7th, Yamaguchi arrived in Nagasaki. He went straight to his home. When Hisako saw her husband, she screamed. His face was swollen and blackened with burns. His arms were wrapped in bandages, already soaking through with fluid from his wounds. But he was home. He was alive. She helped him inside and tended to his injuries as best she could. Medical supplies were scarce, but love and determination could accomplish much. Yamaguchi collapsed into bed, his body demanding rest after the trauma it had endured. He spent August 7th and 8th recovering at home. The burns were severe, but not fatal. His eyes, though damaged, would heal. He had been far enough from the hypocenter to avoid the worst of the radiation, though he did not know it at the time. No one understood radiation sickness yet. The atomic bomb was so new, so unprecedented, that the full scope of its horror had not yet been measured. Yamaguchi simply knew he hurt everywhere and needed to rest. On the morning of August 9th, despite his injuries, Yamaguchi reported to the Mitsubishi offices in Nagasaki. Japanese work culture demanded dedication, and Yamaguchi was a man of duty. He needed to file his report about the Hiroshima assignment. He needed to tell his supervisors what had happened. When he arrived at the office, his colleagues were shocked to see him. His bandages, his burns, his haunted expression, all told a story of survival against the odds. Yamaguchi sat in his supervisor's office and began explaining what he had witnessed in Hiroshima. He described the flash of light, the massive explosion, the total destruction of the city. One bomb, he insisted, had leveled everything for miles. His supervisor listened with growing skepticism. The claim seemed absurd. No single bomb could destroy an entire city. Perhaps Yamaguchi had been confused by the trauma. Perhaps he had been too close to a conventional bombing raid and misjudged the scale. At 11:02 in the morning, as Yamaguchi argued that what he had seen was real, the sky above Nagasaki turned white, the same impossible light, the same searing heat, the same thunder of apocalypse. Fat Man, the second atomic bomb, detonated 1,600 feet above the Urakami Valley with a force of 21,000 tons of TNT. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, still burned from the first atomic bomb, was about to survive the second. The office building shook violently. Windows exploded inward, sending glass shards flying through the room. Yamaguchi dove under a desk, the muscle memory of survival from 3 days earlier taking over. The blast wave roared through the city like the breath of an angry god. The building held, but barely. When the shaking stopped, Yamaguchi emerged from beneath the desk. His supervisor stared at him in absolute shock. The flash, the explosion, everything Yamaguchi had described was happening again. Nagasaki burned. The bomb had detonated in a valley, which somewhat contained the blast, but the destruction was still catastrophic. 40,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would die in the coming days and weeks from burns and radiation. The Mitsubishi shipyard where Yamaguchi worked was heavily damaged. The factory complex where thousands labored was reduced to twisted metal and rubble. But once again, impossibly, Yamaguchi lived. He ran home through the burning city. He had to reach his family. He had to know if they had survived. The route took him through devastation that mirrored Hiroshima. Bodies in the street, buildings collapsed into piles of timber and concrete, people wandering in shock, their clothes burned off, their skin hanging in ribbons. The same nightmare repeated. Yamaguchi ran with strength he should not have had, driven by desperation and love. When he reached his home, He found it damaged but standing. More importantly, he found Hisako and Katsutoshi alive. They had been far enough from the hypocenter to survive the initial blast. His wife had thrown herself over their infant son when the windows shattered, shielding him with her body. She was cut and bruised, but alive. The baby cried, which meant he breathed. They were together. In a city of death, the Yamaguchi family had survived both atomic bombs. The days following the second bombing blurred together in a haze of pain and survival. Nagasaki smoldered. The smell of burning wood, burning flesh, burning everything hung in the air. Yamaguchi's burns from Hiroshima became infected. His new injuries from Nagasaki compounded the damage. He developed a high fever. His hair began falling out in clumps, one of the early signs of radiation sickness, though no one recognized it as such yet. The Yamaguchi family took shelter in an air raid bunker outside the city. Hundreds of survivors crowded into the space, seeking protection from further attacks. No one knew if more bombs would fall. No one understood what these weapons were or why they were so powerful. Rumors spread through the shelter. Some said America had harnessed the power of the sun. Others claimed it was divine punishment. The truth, nuclear fission and the splitting of atoms, was beyond the comprehension of most people. In 1945, medical care was nearly non-existent. The hospitals had been destroyed or overwhelmed. Doctors and nurses who survived worked with almost no supplies, trying to treat injuries they had never seen before. Radiation poisoning manifested in horrible ways. People who seemed fine after the blast suddenly began bleeding from their gums, their noses, their eyes. Their hair fell out. Their skin erupted in purple spots. They wasted away and died, and no one could explain why. Yamaguchi watched people around him sicken and die. He wondered when it would be his turn. The fevers came and went. His burns slowly began to heal, but the process was agonizing. Every day was a battle simply to survive. Food was scarce. Water was contaminated. The infrastructure of civilization had collapsed. Yet the Yamaguchis endured. Hisako cared for her husband and son with fierce determination. She would not let her family die, not after surviving the impossible twice. On August 15th, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was over. The announcement came over the radio in a speech that shocked the nation. Many Japanese had never heard the emperor's voice before. His words were formal, carefully chosen, speaking of enduring the unendurable and bearing the unbearable. For the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those words carried a weight that others could not fully understand. The occupation began. American forces arrived in Japan, and with them came doctors and scientists studying the effects of the atomic bombs. Yamaguchi was examined by American physicians who documented his burns, his radiation exposure, his impossible survival. They measured and photographed him like a specimen. He was a living testament to both the power of nuclear weapons and the resilience of the human body. The Americans called him lucky. Yamaguchi did not feel lucky. In the months and years that followed, Yamaguchi struggled to rebuild his life. The physical scars faded somewhat, though the burns on his arms and face would mark him forever. The psychological scars went deeper. He suffered from nightmares, flashbacks, and survivor's guilt. Why had he lived when so many died? What cosmic lottery had spared him twice when others perished in the first flash of light? These questions haunted him. He returned to work at Mitsubishi, eventually becoming a teacher at the company's technical school. He taught drafting and engineering to young students. He married life, demanded that he move forward, that he function in society, that he provide for his family. So he did, but the bombs never left him. They lived in his memory, in his damaged hearing, in the scars that covered his skin. He carried Hiroshima and Nagasaki with him every day. For decades, Yamaguchi rarely spoke about his experiences. The topic was too painful, too overwhelming. Japan was rebuilding, looking toward the future, not dwelling on the past. Hibakusha, the bomb-affected people, often faced discrimination. Some believed they carried contamination. Others thought their bad luck might be contagious. Yamaguchi kept quiet, lived his life, raised his family. He tried to be normal in a world that could never truly be normal again. But silence has a cost. The memories festered, the nightmares persisted. Yamaguchi developed cancer in his 60s, likely caused by his radiation exposure. He underwent treatment and survived, adding another impossible recovery to his story. As he aged, as he watched his son grow and have children of his own, Yamaguchi began to feel a responsibility. His story was not just his own. It belonged to history. It belonged to the future. In his 70s, Tsutomu Yamaguchi finally began to speak. The decision did not come easily. For most of his life, he had tried to forget, to move past the horror of August 1945, but forgetting, he realized, was a form of betrayal. The dead of Hiroshima and Nagasaki could not speak. Their voices had been silenced forever in atomic fire, but he could speak. He had witnessed both bombings. He had survived to tell the tale. And perhaps he thought his testimony could help prevent such weapons from ever being used again. The Japanese government had long maintained records of hibakusha, certifying their exposure to the atomic bombs. Yamaguchi had been certified as a Nagasaki hibakusha, since that was his official residence, but his experience in Hiroshima had never been formally recognized. In 2009, at the age of 93, Yamaguchi decided to seek official recognition as a double hibakusha. He submitted his testimony, along with supporting evidence from colleagues who had been with him in Hiroshima. On March 24, 2009, the government officially recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as the only person to have survived both atomic bombings. He was the only Niju hibakusha, double bomb survivor, officially certified in history. The recognition brought international attention. News outlets around the world covered the story of the man who survived the impossible twice. Yamaguchi agreed to speak, understanding that his story carried a message the world needed to hear. He was not a hero, he insisted. He was simply a witness, a survivor who could testify to the horror of nuclear weapons. Yamaguchi gave interviews from his home in Nagasaki. He sat in his modest living room, an elderly man with kind eyes and scarred skin, and described what he had seen. The flash of light that seemed brighter than the sun, the heat that burned without flame, the mushroom cloud that rose into the sky like a pillar connecting earth and heaven, the black rain that fell afterward, thick with radioactive particles, the people crying for water, the children wandering lost through the ruins, the silence of mass death. He spoke about the long-term effects as well, the cancers that developed years after exposure, the birth defects seen in children of survivors, the chronic illnesses that plagued hibakusha for the rest of their lives. Nuclear weapons, Yamaguchi explained, did not just kill in the moment of detonation. They kept killing for decades, poisoning blood and bone, corrupting DNA itself. They were weapons that murdered the future along with the present. Yamaguchi became an advocate for nuclear disarmament. He spoke at conferences and schools. He met with politicians and peace activists. His message was simple and urgent. Nuclear weapons must never be used again. He had seen their power twice. He knew what they could do. And he knew that the bombs dropped on Japan in 1945 were tiny compared to the weapons in modern arsenals. The horror he had witnessed could be multiplied a thousandfold. In interviews, Yamaguchi was asked if he felt lucky. He would pause before answering. Lucky was not the word he would choose. He had lost friends and colleagues in both cities. He had suffered burns and radiation sickness. He had lived with nightmares for more than 60 years, but he was alive when hundreds of thousands had died. He preferred to say he was grateful. Grateful for the years he had been given. Grateful for his family. Grateful for the opportunity to bear witness. The international community took note of his testimony. The United Nations invited him to speak. Peace organizations honored him. Schools taught his story as part of their history curriculum. Yamaguchi's tale became part of the global conversation about nuclear weapons, war, and peace. He represented living proof of both human resilience and the catastrophic consequences of nuclear war. Yet, even as he spoke to the world, Yamaguchi remained humble. He did not want to be celebrated as extraordinary. He wanted his story to serve as a warning. What happened to him should never happen to anyone else. The weapons that burned him should be eliminated from the earth. That was his mission in his final years. Not fame, not recognition, but the hope that his suffering might help prevent future suffering. He spoke often about the children of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, wanting the world to remember those whose futures had been stolen. Tsutomu Yamaguchi died on January 4, 2010, at the age of 93. The cause of death was stomach cancer, likely linked to his radiation exposure 65 years earlier. He passed away in Nagasaki, the city where he had lived most of his life, the city where he had survived the second atomic bomb. His death made headlines around the world. Obituaries celebrated his life, his survival, and his tireless advocacy for peace. He left behind his wife Hisako, who had survived Nagasaki with him. He left behind his son, Katsutoshi, the infant he had rushed home to find alive on August 9th, 1945. He left behind grandchildren and great-grandchildren, generations born because he survived. His family was his legacy, proof that life continues even after unimaginable destruction. But he also left behind his testimony, his voice recorded in dozens of interviews, his warning to future generations. The story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi challenges our understanding of probability and fate. What are the odds of being in two cities at the exact moment when nuclear weapons are detonated? Hiroshima and Nagasaki are separated by nearly 200 miles. The bombings happened 3 days apart. Yamaguchi had to be in Hiroshima for work, had to forget his stamp seal, had to be in that specific location when Little Boy detonated. Then he had to survive, board a train, return to Nagasaki, and be at work when Fat Man exploded. Each step in that chain was unlikely. The combination was nearly impossible. Yet it happened. Some people called his survival a miracle. Others attributed it to luck or fate. Yamaguchi himself struggled with the question of why. Why him? Why twice? He never found a satisfying answer. Perhaps there was no answer. Perhaps randomness is truly random, and meaning is something we impose afterward. Or perhaps there was a purpose to his survival. Perhaps he was meant to witness both bombings so that he could testify to what nuclear weapons truly do. His story serves as a bridge between past and present. The generation that experienced World War II directly is disappearing. Soon, there will be no living witnesses to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The hibakusha are aging and dying, taking their memories with them. Yamaguchi's documented testimony becomes increasingly valuable as that living connection to history fades. His voice, preserved in recordings and interviews, will speak to generations not yet born. The world, today, possesses approximately 13,000 nuclear weapons, most far more powerful than the bombs dropped on Japan. 19 countries have nuclear arsenals. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction keeps an uneasy peace, based on the promise that nuclear war would annihilate everyone involved. But that doctrine assumes rational actors, functioning systems, and no accidents. History suggests that assumption may be dangerously optimistic. Close calls have happened. Near misses have occurred. The world has come closer to nuclear war than most people realize. Tsutomu Yamaguchi's story reminds us what is at stake. Nuclear weapons are not abstract concepts. They are not statistics on a spreadsheet or markers on a military map. They are heat and light and death on a scale that defies comprehension. They are cities turned to ash in seconds. They are people burned alive or slowly dying from radiation. They are futures erased, children who will never grow up, families destroyed. Yamaguchi saw this twice. He knew his advocacy for nuclear disarmament was rooted in that knowledge. He was not naive about international relations or geopolitics. He understood that nations seek security and that weapons can provide deterrence. But he also understood, with a clarity born from experience, that nuclear weapons are different. Their use cannot be limited or controlled. Their consequences extend across generations. A world with nuclear weapons is a world perpetually one mistake away from apocalypse. In his final interview, given shortly before his death, Yamaguchi spoke about hope. Despite everything he had endured, despite the nightmares and the suffering and the grief, he believed humanity could choose peace. He believed nuclear weapons could be abolished. He believed future generations could live in a world free from the threat of atomic annihilation. It was this hope that kept him speaking, kept him testifying, kept him fighting for change, even in his 90s. The man who survived both atomic bombs became a symbol of resilience. Yes, but also of the human cost of nuclear weapons. His scars were not metaphorical. His suffering was not abstract. When he spoke about the flash of light and the wave of heat, he spoke from memory, from experience, from pain. His testimony carried a weight that theoretical discussions of nuclear strategy could never match. Today, memorials in Hiroshima and Nagasaki honor the victims of the atomic bombings. Museums preserve artifacts and testimonies from survivors. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial, the skeletal dome that withstood the blast, stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. These places remember, they educate, they warn. And among the stories told in these spaces, the story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi holds a unique place. The only man to officially survive both bombings. The witness who saw the same horror twice and lived to tell humanity what we must never do again. His life spanned from 1916 to 2010, from one world war to another, from the atomic age to the digital age. He saw Japan transform from empire to occupied territory, to economic powerhouse, to modern democracy. He witnessed incredible technological progress and terrible human cruelty. Through it all, he carried the memory of those two flashes of light, those two moments when the world ended and somehow he survived. His story is history. His warning is for the future. May we have the wisdom to listen.